Millionaire didn't know he had a son until he met Quadruplets at his wife's grave. Before we begin our story, we'd love to know where you're joining us from. Share your location in the comments section below, and if you're enjoying our content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Now, sit back and enjoy the tale. The autumn wind scattered golden leaves across Oakwood Cemetery as Richard Hamilton stood motionless before the freshly dug grave. The elegant mahogany casket was being lowered into the ground, taking with it the last physical remnant of Catherine, his beloved wife. The cold October air bit through his expensive overcoat, but Richard barely noticed. Nothing seemed to matter anymore. Not the empire of luxury properties he'd built across 3 continents. Not the billions in his accounts. Not the respectful distance his business associates maintained as they waited to offer condolences. "Sir," whispered James, his loyal assistant of 15 years, "the car is ready whenever you are." Richard nodded almost imperceptibly, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the casket. Catherine had been gone for 3 days, but the reality of her absence was only now crystallizing as dirt began to cover the polished wood. Acute myeloid leukemia, the diagnosis had come suddenly, and within months, the vibrant, brilliant woman who had been his partner in every sense was gone, leaving behind a void that echoed through his Manhattan penthouse and the corners of his heart. The funeral had drawn New York's elite, business partners, socialites, politicians, many who barely knew Catherine but understood the importance of being seen at such events. Richard resented their presence, their performative grief, their whispered speculations about his future now that he was alone again. Catherine had deserved better. She deserved privacy, dignity, and mourners who genuinely treasured her sharp mind and compassionate spirit. She deserved a future that stretched decades longer than her 42 years. As the service concluded, Richard stepped forward and placed a single white rose atop the mound of earth. It had been Catherine's favorite, simple, elegant, and classic, just like her. For a moment he closed his eyes, remembering her delighted smile when he'd bring home bouquets for no special occasion, just to see that expression light up her face. "I'll miss you every day," he whispered, words meant only for her. When he opened his eyes, ready to turn away and face a world without Catherine in it, something at the edge of his vision caught his attention. Near a massive oak tree about 30 yards away stood 4 small figures, watching the proceedings with unusual intensity. 4 little girls, identical in appearance, with honey-colored hair pulled back in matching navy blue headbands. They wore simple but neat dresses in different colors, yellow, blue, green, and purple, perhaps the only way to tell them apart. They appeared to be about 7 years old, and there was something eerily synchronized about their stance, their attention fixed directly on him. Richard frowned. They weren't dressed like the other attendees. They didn't seem to be with any of the adults present. And there was something about them, something in their solemn expressions, and the way they stood perfectly still, while other children their age might fidget or lose interest, that made his heart beat a little faster. But it was their eyes that truly captured his attention. Even from this distance, there was something hauntingly familiar about them, something that reminded him of "Mr. Hamilton," a sharp female voice called out, breaking his concentration. A woman in her late 30s with dark hair pulled into a severe bun approached the 4 girls, placing protective hands on the shoulders of 2 of them. She cast a cold, almost hostile glance in Richard's direction before hurrying the children away. "Sir?" James prompted again. "Everyone is waiting to speak with you at the reception." Richard nodded absently, watching as the 4 identical little girls disappeared behind the oak tree with the woman. "James, did you see those children? The 4 identical girls?" James glanced in the direction Richard indicated. "Only briefly, sir. Perhaps relatives of the cemetery staff? Or a family paying respects at another grave?" "Perhaps," Richard murmured, though something told him there was more to it. "Let's get this reception over with. I need to be alone." Later that night in his penthouse 40 floors above Manhattan, Richard stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The city lights twinkled far below, a constellation of human activity continuing despite his personal apocalypse. On his desk sat a framed photograph of Catherine, taken on their 10th anniversary trip to Santorini. Her smile was radiant, her eyes, a unique shade between green and gold, sparkling with joy. Those eyes. Richard set down his glass and moved to his computer, pulling up the funeral video his assistant had arranged to have recorded. He fast-forwarded until he spotted the 4 little girls in the background, then zoomed in as much as the resolution would allow. There it was, unmistakable even in this grainy image. The same unique color, that same distinctive shape. Catherine's eyes looking back at him from 4 identical small faces. Richard fell back in his chair, his mind racing through possibilities, calculations, timelines. Catherine had traveled extensively for her work as an international art curator, especially during their first years of marriage. There had been a period, about 8 years ago, when she'd taken an extended assignment in Europe, when she'd become strangely distant for several months. "It's not possible," he whispered to the empty room, but the image on his screen suggested otherwise. His hand reached for his phone. "James, I need you to do something for me. Those 4 identical girls at the cemetery today, I need to know who they are. Everything you can find. And James, this stays between us." As he hung up, Richard looked again at Catherine's photograph, 1,000 questions forming in his mind. After 7 years of marriage, had his wife left behind secrets that would shatter his world for a second time? Richard barely slept that night, haunted by the image of 4 identical faces with Catherine's distinctive eyes. As dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline, he found himself staring at old photographs of Catherine, searching for clues he might have missed, signs of a secret she'd kept hidden. The intercom buzzed precisely at 9. James was nothing if not punctual, especially when the matter was urgent. "Enter," Richard called, setting aside the photo album as his assistant walked in, carrying a leather portfolio. "Sir, I have some preliminary information," James said, his usual professional demeanor tinged with uncharacteristic hesitation. "Though, I must say, gathering details about minors without raising suspicions was challenging." "I understand. Just tell me what you found," Richard replied, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. James opened the portfolio. "Their names are Lily, Emma, Sophia, and Olivia Reynolds, quadruplets born 7 years ago at New York Presbyterian Hospital. They live in Brooklyn with their aunt, Victoria Reynolds, who appears to be their legal guardian." He paused, glancing up at Richard. "Victoria Reynolds is Catherine's younger sister." Richard's fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair. Catherine had mentioned Victoria occasionally, a high school counselor who'd chosen a different path from Catherine's glamorous art world career. They'd never met. Victoria had always been too busy to attend any events with Catherine and Richard. "And their birth certificates?" Richard asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mother, Catherine Reynolds Hamilton. Father." James hesitated again. "Father not listed, sir." Richard stood abruptly, walking to the window. The timeline aligned perfectly. 8 years ago, Catherine had spent 6 months in Europe curating a major exhibition. When she returned, something had changed between them, a subtle distance he'd attributed to her intensive work schedule. They'd gradually found their way back to each other, but she'd never again mentioned wanting children, a topic they'd discussed early in their marriage. "She never told me," Richard said, more to himself than to James. "She never said a word about being pregnant, about having our children." "Sir, if I may," James said carefully, "we don't know with certainty that—" "I saw their eyes, James," Richard interrupted. "They have Catherine's eyes, the exact same unusual color. And the timing." He turned to face his assistant. "I need more. School records, medical history, everything about their lives. And I need to understand why Catherine kept them from me. There must be letters, journals, something." "I'll do what I can, sir. But approaching this matter directly might be delicate. If Victoria Reynolds has had custody all these years, she may have reasons for keeping the girls separated from you." Richard's expression hardened. "Find out everything. James, I've missed 7 years of my daughter's lives. I won't miss another day." After James left, Richard sat at his desk, staring at the search results on his screen. Social media was sparse. Victoria Reynolds maintained virtually no online presence. But he'd found the website for Greenwood Academy, the private school the girls attended. Their class had performed a spring recital, and there they were in a group photo. 4 identical little girls in the front row, wearing matching outfits, but with different colored ribbons in their hair. Richard studied each face carefully. Even in this small image, he could see hints of Catherine in their features, in the slight tilt of their chins. But he could see himself too. The shape of their foreheads, the set of their shoulders, his daughters. 4 daughters he'd never known existed. A notification pinged on his phone. James had sent a brief message. Found school schedule and activities. Ballet lessons Tuesdays and Thursdays at Parkside Dance Academy. Art classes Wednesdays at Brooklyn Children's Museum. Victoria picks them up daily at 3:15 p.m. Richard checked his watch. It was Tuesday, just past noon. He had 3 hours to prepare for his first glimpse of his daughters outside the grim setting of a funeral. At exactly 3 p.m., Richard sat in his black Bentley across from Greenwood Academy, his heart pounding with an unfamiliar anxiety. He'd faced down corporate rivals, negotiated billion-dollar deals, and transformed the New York skyline with his developments, yet nothing had prepared him for the emotion of this moment. The school bell rang, and children began streaming out into the crisp autumn afternoon. And then he saw them, 4 identical little girls in navy blue uniforms and different colored headbands, walking together in perfect synchronization. Even from this distance, Richard could see distinct personalities emerging through their movements. One scanning her surroundings alertly, another with her nose in a book, a third skipping slightly, the fourth maintaining perfect posture like a tiny dancer. As if sensing his presence, one of the girls, the one in the yellow headband, stopped suddenly and looked directly at his car. For a brief moment, those eyes so like Catherine's seemed to stare into his soul. The moment shattered when Victoria appeared, ushering the girls toward a modest sedan parked nearby. Before they drove away, the girl in the yellow headband turned, again her gaze lingering on Richard's car with unmistakable curiosity. Richard started his engine, intending to follow at a discreet distance, when his phone rang. It was James again. "Sir, I've found something important. Catherine left a safety deposit box that was opened after her death. Among the contents was a sealed letter addressed to the girls, to be given to them on their 18th birthday. The bank officer who processed the paperwork remembered it because of its unusual instructions." "What did it say?" Richard demanded. "I don't know the contents, sir. But there was also a journal. Victoria claimed all items as the girl's guardian, but according to my source, she was visibly upset by whatever she read in Catherine's personal papers." Richard's mind raced with possibilities. Had Catherine left explanations? Truths that Victoria was now concealing? "I need to see those documents, James. Find a way." As he pulled away from the curb, following the direction Victoria's car had taken, Richard felt a newfound determination rising within him. These weren't just Catherine's daughters, they were his children too. And somehow he would find a way to become part of their lives, to understand why they had been kept from him, and to reclaim the years that had been stolen from all of them. Whatever secrets Catherine had kept, whatever lies Victoria might be telling, Richard Hamilton would uncover the truth. For himself, and for 4 little girls who deserved to know their father. 2 days after discovering his daughter's existence, Richard sat in his home office surrounded by files James had somehow obtained. He stared at 4 birth certificates: Lily Grace Reynolds, Emma Rose Reynolds, Sophia Faith Reynolds, and Olivia Hope Reynolds, all born within minutes of each other at New York Presbyterian. Mother, Catherine Reynolds Hamilton. Father, not listed. "Why, Catherine?" he whispered, touching her photograph on his desk. "Why keep them from me?" James entered with a thin folder. "Sir, my contact at Catherine's law firm shared this. It's a copy of a letter found among her personal effects." Richard's hands trembled as he read, "My dearest Richard, if you're reading this, then fate has been unkind, and I've left this world before finding the courage to tell you the truth. 7 years ago, while in Paris, I discovered I was carrying our children. Yes, children. 4 miraculous little lives that would forever change mine. I made a choice then that I've questioned every day since. You were negotiating the Singapore development, the project that would establish your international reputation. When we spoke of children before, you'd always said someday, when your empire was secure, when the time was right. I couldn't ask you to choose between your dreams and a family you weren't ready for. So I chose for us both. I returned to New York, confided in Victoria, and together we created a story that would allow me to remain in your life while raising our daughters separately. It was never meant to be permanent. Each year I promised myself I would tell you when the time was right. But life has a way of making cowards of us all, and the right moment never seemed to come. The girls know of you. I've shared stories of their brilliant, visionary father. Perhaps this was selfish, to keep them in my world while preserving your freedom to build yours. Forgive me if you can. Know that not a day passed when I didn't consider what might have been if I'd made a different choice. With eternal love, Catherine. The letter slipped from Richard's fingers. Catherine had believed she was protecting his dreams, his ambitions. She'd carried the burden alone rather than risk derailing his plans. James, what does Victoria Reynolds tell the girls about me? According to my sources, sir, she's fostered the belief that you abandoned Catherine upon learning of her pregnancy, that you chose your career over family. Richard's jaw tightened. So I'm the villain in their story. It appears so. Victoria Reynolds has filed for exclusive permanent guardianship. The hearing is next month. Richard stood, decision crystallizing. Contact Walsh. I want the best family law team assembled immediately. Sir, approaching this legally could be traumatic for... I've missed 7 years, James. I won't miss another day. Find me a way to meet my daughters properly. It's time they learned the truth about their father. For the next 2 weeks, Richard Hamilton lived a double life. By day, he was the formidable business magnate, commanding boardrooms and closing deals. But afternoons found him in places no one would expect: school performances, community parks, and outside dance studios. He watched his daughters from a distance, drinking in details of their lives, memorizing their mannerisms. Each girl, though identical in appearance, moved through the world distinctly. Lily, always in yellow, was clearly the protector. She walked slightly ahead of her sisters, her eyes constantly scanning surroundings, her posture alert. When a boy accidentally bumped into Emma outside school, it was Lily who stepped forward first, chin raised defensively. Emma, in blue, carried books everywhere. During a visit to the park, Richard observed her collecting leaves, examining each with scientific curiosity, before making notes in a small journal. She wore tiny glasses that somehow made her look even more serious. Sophia, in green, moved with artistic grace. At the community center where they attended art class, Richard glimpsed her paintings, vibrant, emotional works surprising from someone so young. The teacher spoke animatedly to Victoria, clearly impressed by Sophia's talent. Olivia, in purple, was the peacemaker. When her sisters disagreed over which playground equipment to use first, it was Olivia who suggested a rotation system, her small hands gesturing expressively until everyone nodded in agreement. They're extraordinary, Richard told James as they sat in the car after watching the girls' ballet practice. They appear to be, sir, James agreed. But I should warn you. My investigation has uncovered concerning financial circumstances. Victoria Reynolds is struggling. Catherine's medical bills consumed much of her savings, and Victoria's counselor's salary barely covers essentials. The tuition for Greenwood Academy comes from a trust Catherine established, but it doesn't cover everything 4 growing girls need. Richard's jaw tightened. My daughters shouldn't want for anything. Victoria has rejected financial assistance from Catherine's former colleagues. She's fiercely independent. Or simply preventing anyone connected to me from helping, Richard said grimly. Find out what they need most: clothes, books, anything, and arrange delivery anonymously. That evening, Richard studied the legal documents his attorneys had prepared. The paternity case was strong, especially with Catherine's letter, but courts favored established guardianship arrangements, particularly when children were thriving. His phone rang. James again. Sir, Victoria Reynolds just registered for teaching positions in Connecticut. I believe she's planning to relocate with the girls. Richard set down the papers, his decision made. Waiting wasn't an option anymore. Move up our timeline. I want to meet them properly. How do you suggest we approach this, sir? Victoria Reynolds has been careful to keep them away from you. Richard smiled slightly, his mind already formulating a plan. Everyone has patterns, James. Find me the right moment, the right place, somewhere Victoria can't simply rush them away. Somewhere public but intimate enough for conversation. As he hung up, Richard looked again at the photographs James had taken of the girls at their ballet practice. 4 perfect little dancers in matching tutus but different colored ribbons. His daughters. Soon, he promised himself. Very soon. Morrison's. Bookshop in Brooklyn Heights was the quintessential neighborhood bookstore, small, charming, with worn wooden shelves and the comforting scent of paper and binding glue. Richard had chosen it carefully after learning the girls visited every Saturday morning, while Victoria attended her yoga class next door. Richard arrived early, selecting a position near the children's section with a clear view of the entrance. He dressed down in jeans and a simple button-down shirt, a far cry from his usual tailored suits. In his hands was The Universe in You, A Child's Guide to Astronomy, a book James had discovered was on Emma's wish list. At precisely 10:15, the bell above the door chimed. 4 identical girls entered, immediately splitting up with practiced efficiency. Lily headed for adventure books, Emma for science, Sophia drifted toward art books, and Olivia made a beeline for stories about animals. Richard's heart pounded. He'd watched them from afar for weeks, but being in the same room, breathing the same air, it was overwhelming. These were his daughters, his and Catherine's legacy. He waited 10 minutes, then casually moved toward the science section where Emma was sitting cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in a book about planets. That's a good one, he said softly, indicating the book in her hands. Emma looked up, pushing her small glasses higher on her nose. It's okay, but it doesn't explain gravitational waves very well, she replied matter-of-factly. Richard couldn't help smiling. You're interested in gravitational waves? Yes. They're ripples in space-time caused by violent cosmic events. I did my science project on them last year. That's impressive. You know, I have a book here that might explain them better. He offered the astronomy guide. Emma's eyes widened as she read the title. This is the new edition. Our library only has the old one. It's yours if you'd like it, Richard said gently. Emma hesitated, glancing toward her sisters. I'd have to ask my aunt first. We're not supposed to talk to strangers. That's very wise, Richard acknowledged. My name is Richard Hamilton. I was a friend of your mother's. The effect was immediate. All 4 girls seemed to sense the conversation, their heads turning simultaneously. Within seconds, they had converged around Emma, forming a protective circle. You knew our mom? Lily asked, stepping slightly in front of her sisters. I did, Richard replied, his throat tight with emotion. Catherine was very special to me. Richard Hamilton, Sophia repeated slowly. Are you the man who builds tall buildings? Before Richard could answer, the bookshop door flew open. Victoria Reynolds stood there, her yoga mat still slung over her shoulder, eyes widening in shock and anger when she spotted Richard with the girls. Girls, come here immediately, she commanded, her voice sharp. But Aunt Victoria, this man knew Mom, Olivia protested. Now, Victoria insisted, herding them toward the door. As they were rushed out, Emma clutched the astronomy book to her chest, looking back at Richard with curious eyes that mirrored Catherine's so perfectly, it made his heart ache. Through the window, he watched Victoria gesturing angrily. The girls huddled around her on the sidewalk. But before they walked away, All four turned to look at him one last time. Richard took out his phone. "James, it's done. Victoria knows I found them." He paused, watching the family disappear around a corner. And now we move to phase 2. Richard sat in his office reviewing the covert reports from James. Since the bookstore encounter 3 weeks ago, Victoria had altered the girls' routines, changing their ballet studio and shopping at different stores. She was clearly trying to prevent another accidental meeting. But Richard Hamilton hadn't built an empire by accepting defeat. If direct approaches wouldn't work, he would find other ways to connect with his daughters. "Sir, the arrangements have been made as requested," James announced, entering with several folders. "Greenwood Academy has accepted the anonymous donation for their science program. The new telescopes will arrive next week, just in time for the astronomy night Emma's class is organizing." Richard nodded, studying the brochure for the event. "And the others?" "The children's art exhibition has been expanded to include a special scholarship in Catherine's name. Sophia's teacher has already nominated her work for consideration." James continued. "The library has accepted the rare book collection donation. The adventure series Lily checked out 3 times will be prominently featured. And the music program Olivia participates in will receive new instruments and expanded hours, as requested." "Excellent," Richard said, leaning back in his chair. "Any change in Victoria's legal maneuvers?" James hesitated. "She's accelerated the guardianship petition and included language specifically barring any paternity claims. Our legal team believes she suspects your intentions." Richard's jaw tightened. "She's trying to prevent me from even establishing I'm their father." "Yes, sir. However," James continued, "our investigators found something concerning. Victoria has significant debt beyond Catherine's medical bills. Her house is facing possible foreclosure, and she's applied for teaching positions outside New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, even as far as Ohio." Richard stood abruptly. "She's planning to take my daughters away." "It appears so, sir." Richard paced to the window, gazing at the city he'd helped shape. Somewhere out there, 4 little girls carried his blood, his legacy, and Victoria intended to ensure they never knew him. "The winter recital at their school," Richard said suddenly. "When is it?" "Next Friday evening, sir. But given Victoria's recent behavior, I'll be there. Not as a spectator, but as a sponsor. Contact the school. I want to establish a performing arts endowment in Catherine's name, one that requires the donor's presence at major events." James nodded, understanding dawning on his face. "A position Victoria cannot protest without seeming ungrateful to the school." "Exactly." Richard turned from the window, a determined gleam in his eye. "Also have our team accelerate the legal preparation. If Victoria intends to leave New York, we need to be ready to file for emergency intervention." After James departed, Richard opened his laptop to review photographs of the 4 girls from their ballet recital. Lily's determined expression, Emma's precise movements, Sophia's artistic flourish, and Olivia's joyful presence. His phone chimed, with a message from an unknown number. He opened it to find a photograph of Emma beaming beside a new telescope, with text. "Thought you might want to see this. She hasn't stopped talking about stars since. Ms. Jenkins, science teacher." Richard smiled, hope rising in his chest. Small connections, invisible threads. He was slowly weaving himself into his daughters' lives. Victoria might control their schedules, their home, even their perceptions of him, but she couldn't isolate them completely from the world, or from a father determined to know his children. The auditorium at Greenwood Academy hummed with excitement as parents found their seats for the winter recital. Richard arrived early, impeccably dressed but intentionally understated, as the newly announced benefactor of the Catherine Reynolds Hamilton Performing Arts Fund. His presence was not only accepted but welcomed by school administrators. Victoria spotted him immediately upon entering with the girls. Her face tightened, but with the school's headmistress hovering nearby, she could only manage a curt nod before guiding the quadruplets to the preparation area backstage. "Mr. Hamilton, such a pleasure to have you with us tonight," gushed Headmistress Winslow. Your generous endowment will transform our arts program. Catherine valued education in the arts, Richard replied. I'm simply honoring her memory. The headmistress beamed. The Reynolds girls are performing a special dance number tonight. Such talented children. They must remind you of Catherine. Yes, Richard said softly. They do. The lights dimmed and the show began. Richard sat through several performances, applauding politely but waiting for only one act. Finally, the announcer called, "Please welcome Lily, Emma, Sophia, and Olivia Reynolds performing Waltz of the Snowflakes." The curtain rose to reveal 4 small figures in white tutus, positioned like delicate snowflakes on the stage. As the music swelled, they began to dance, moving with surprising grace and coordination for 7-year-olds. Richard leaned forward, transfixed. Though identical in appearance, each girl brought something unique to her performance. Lily's movements were precise and controlled. Emma danced with mathematical accuracy. Sophia added artistic flourishes to each turn. Olivia seemed to feel the music most deeply, her expression transported. When the performance ended, the audience erupted in applause. Richard stood, unable to contain his pride, his heart overflowing with an emotion he'd never experienced before. Backstage after the show, Richard strategically positioned himself near the refreshment table where families gathered. He chatted with the headmistress until, inevitably, the 4 little dancers appeared in their regular clothes, each wearing their signature colors. It was Sophia who spotted him first, tugging on Emma's sleeve and whispering urgently. All 4 approached cautiously, with Victoria distracted by another parent. "You're the man from the bookstore," Lily stated, her yellow headband slightly askew from changing out of her costume. "I am," Richard confirmed, kneeling to their level. "You all danced beautifully tonight. Did you know our mom was a dancer too?" Olivia asked, her eyes wide. "I did. She loved ballet, especially Tchaikovsky." Emma adjusted her glasses. "You're also the person who donated the new telescopes to the science lab." Richard smiled, surprised by her perception. "What makes you think that?" "Probability analysis," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "The timing of your appearance and the donation is statistically significant." Before Richard could respond, Victoria materialized beside them, her expression stormy. "Girls, it's time to go." "But Aunt Victoria," Sophia protested, "Mr. Hamilton was telling us about Mom." "He hardly knew your mother," Victoria said sharply. Richard stood, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "Actually, I knew Catherine very well. We shared many important moments together." Something flashed in Victoria's eyes. Fear, perhaps, or anger. "Girls, wait by the door," she ordered. Once they reluctantly moved away, Victoria stepped closer, to Richard. "Stop this," she hissed. "You abandoned Catherine when she needed you most. You have no right to intrude on their lives now." "Is that what you've told them?" Richard asked quietly. "That I abandoned their mother and them? We both know that's not true. Catherine never told me about the pregnancy." "Because she knew what kind of man you were. Ambitious, selfish, focused only on your empire," Victoria retorted. "Or perhaps," Richard suggested, his voice level despite his rising anger, "she made a choice she later regretted, as her letter indicates." Victoria paled. "You found her letter?" "I did. And I won't allow you to keep my daughters from me any longer, Victoria. Not with lies, not with legal maneuvers, not by fleeing to Connecticut or Ohio." Before Victoria could respond, Sophia returned, tugging at her aunt's sleeve. "Can Mr. Hamilton come to our birthday party next week, please? He could tell us stories about Mom." Victoria and Richard locked eyes in silent battle. Finally, Victoria forced a smile. "We'll discuss it later, sweetie." But Richard had seen it, the first crack in Victoria's armor, and he intended to widen it whatever it took. Richard checked his watch as he paced the length of his office. 3 days had passed since the recital, and he'd heard nothing about Sophia's birthday party invitation. He'd begun to wonder if Victoria would simply ignore it, hoping the girls would forget. "Sir, James interrupted, entering with a small envelope. This was just delivered by courier. Richard recognized the childish handwriting immediately. Opening it revealed a handmade invitation decorated with glitter and watercolor flowers. You are invited to our 8th birthday, Saturday at 2 p.m. please. Come and tell us stories about Mom from Lily, Emma, Sophia, and Olivia at the bottom, in an adult's handwriting limited to 1 hour. VR, she gave in. Richard murmured, surprised. Not willingly, I suspect, James replied. Our contact at the school mentioned the girls have been quite persistent, asking daily if you'd been invited yet. Richard smiled. Catherine's determination lived on in their daughters. Saturday arrived with Richard feeling uncharacteristically nervous. He'd faced billion-dollar negotiations with less anxiety than this children's party. The gift he'd chosen had been carefully considered. A jewelry box containing 4 delicate silver bracelets, each with a unique charm representing each girl's interests, along with a framed photograph of Catherine he'd found in his personal collection, one they'd likely never seen. Victoria opened the door with a tight smile. 1 hour, as agreed. The modest home was decorated with balloons and streamers, the dining table set with a homemade cake and small piles of presents. 6 or 7 children from school were playing in the living room, supervised by another adult who eyed Richard curiously. Mr. Hamilton. Olivia spotted him first, rushing over in her purple dress. You came. The other 3 quickly joined her, all wearing matching dresses in their signature colors. Happy birthday, Richard said, handing over his carefully wrapped gift. This is for all 4 of you to share. The girls opened it together, gasping at the bracelets. Mine has a telescope charm, Emma exclaimed. And mine has a paintbrush, Sophia added, delighted. Lily examined hers. A book. How did you know I like reading adventures? And mine has a music note, Olivia finished. They're perfect. Victoria watched from across the room, her expression unreadable as the girls excitedly put on their bracelets. What's this? Sophia asked, finding the framed photograph. Your mother at an art exhibition in Paris, Richard explained. She was explaining why Monet's water lilies made her cry. The girls crowded around the image, transfixed by this new glimpse of their mother. She looks happy, Olivia whispered. She was, Richard confirmed. Catherine found joy in beauty. Come, see our room, Emma suddenly suggested. We have Mom's things there. Before Victoria could object, Richard was being led down a hallway by 4 eager tour guides. Their bedroom was small for 4 growing girls. 2 bunk beds arranged perpendicularly, each corner personalized with their individual styles. This is our special box, Lily explained, retrieving a wooden container from a bookshelf. It has all Mom's important things. Inside were treasures, ticket stubs, dried flowers, a small watercolor painting, and photographs, including, to Richard's shock, one of him and Catherine at a benefit gala years ago. Mom told us you were her special friend, Sophia said softly. She said you were building important things all over the world. Is that why you couldn't visit us before? Olivia asked innocently. Were you too busy building things? Richard felt Victoria's presence in the doorway behind him, monitoring his response. He began, choosing his words carefully. I would have visited if I'd known about you. Your mother and I lost touch for a while. Aunt Victoria says Mom had to raise us by herself because our dad wasn't ready for kids, Lily stated bluntly, watching his reaction. Before Richard could respond, Victoria intervened. Girls, the other guests are waiting for cake. As they filed out, Emma lingered, studying Richard with Catherine's inquisitive eyes. You look like us, she said simply, then followed her sisters. Richard remained momentarily, absorbing Emma's observation. The perceptive one had seen what Richard himself had, noticed, the shape of their foreheads, the set of their jaws, subtle traits they'd inherited from him. The first recognition had been made. The first connection established. Despite Victoria's attempts to control the narrative, truth had begun its inevitable emergence. The Heritage Project is an important part of our 3rd grade curriculum, Ms. Peterson explained during the parent-teacher conference. Students research their family backgrounds and create presentations about their ancestry. Victoria nodded, glancing anxiously at her watch. Richard sat beside her, maintaining a respectful distance but unmistakably present. After weeks of careful legal negotiation, he'd secured the right to attend school functions as a family friend, a compromise that had Victoria fuming but unable to protest without appearing unreasonable to the courts. The Reynolds girls seem uncertain about their paternal heritage, Ms. Peterson continued delicately. They've mentioned only having information about their mother's Scottish background. That's correct, Victoria said stiffly. Their father is not in the picture. Richard cleared his throat softly. Perhaps I could help with research resources. As a friend of Catherine's, I'm familiar with some of her family history. Ms. Peterson brightened. That would be wonderful. The girls specifically asked if you might assist them. They were quite impressed by your knowledge of their mother. Outside the classroom, Victoria confronted Richard. This doesn't change anything. The court hasn't ruled on your petition yet. I'm not trying to circumvent the legal process, Victoria, Richard replied evenly. I simply want to help the girls with their project. Fine. Saturday, 10 a.m., 1 hour supervised, Victoria conceded grudgingly. Saturday morning found Richard at Victoria's door with books on Scottish clans, historical photographs of Edinburgh, and traditional Scottish shortbread, a recipe Catherine had once attempted with disastrous but hilarious results. The living room had been transformed into project headquarters, with colored paper, markers, and photographs spread across every surface. 4 identical faces greeted him with varying degrees of enthusiasm, Olivia bouncing excitedly, Sophia smiling warmly, Emma analyzing him thoughtfully, and Lily maintaining her protective reserve. Before we start, Lily announced formally, we need to talk about something important. Victoria moved closer from the kitchen doorway, clearly concerned. We had a family meeting, Lily continued, and we made some rules about you. Richard set down his materials, surprised by this development. That sounds very responsible. May I hear these rules? Lily produced a carefully folded paper from her pocket. Rule 1. You can tell us about Mom, but you can't try to replace her. I would never try, Richard said softly. Your mother was irreplaceable. Rule 2. If you promise something, you have to do it. No exceptions. Absolutely fair, Richard agreed. Emma adjusted her glasses. Rule 3. No buying our friendship. With expensive presents. Rule 4, Sophia added, is that you have to be honest with us. Richard felt the weight of this request, glancing briefly at Victoria. I promise to always be honest with you. And Rule 5, Olivia finished, is that if we decide we don't want to see you anymore, you have to respect that. The last rule struck Richard like a physical blow. These children, his daughters, were asserting their independence, establishing boundaries in a world where adults had made all their decisions. I accept all your rules, he said solemnly. Thank you for being so clear about what you need. Something in Lily's posture relaxed slightly. Okay then. We can start the project. Now, for the next hour they worked together assembling their presentation. Richard shared stories about Catherine's college days and Scottish traditions, carefully navigating around questions that might lead to paternity revelations. As they arranged photographs on their poster board, Emma suddenly asked, Did you know our dad? The room went silent. Victoria tensed visibly. Before Richard could formulate a response, Charlotte intervened. Girls, why don't you show Mr. Hamilton the drawings you made for the Scotland section? The moment passed, but as Richard helped Sophia paste tartan patterns onto their display, he noticed all 4 girls exchanging meaningful glances. They were putting pieces together, forming questions he wasn't yet permitted to answer. As he prepared to leave, Olivia hugged him impulsively. Will you come see our presentation at school next week? I'd like that very much, Richard replied, looking to Victoria for permission. Her expression remained guarded, but she nodded slightly. Another small victory in the quiet battle for his daughter's futures. What about the Bronx Zoo? Richard suggested. Watching the quadruplets finish their hot chocolates at Daisy's Cafe, their Saturday afternoon ritual now in its third week. The girls had devoured their treats with varying approaches. Emma methodically, Lily efficiently, Sophia artistically creating patterns in the whipped cream, and Olivia savoring every sip. Lily shook her head. We've been there twice already. Mom took us last spring. The Museum of Natural History? Richard tried again. Been there too, Emma replied, adjusting her glasses. The dinosaur exhibit is statistically impressive, but we've memorized all the displays. Richard nodded, understanding their need for new experiences, ones that wouldn't overlap with precious memories of Catherine. He'd been careful about that, creating different adventures rather than replacing existing ones. What about ice skating? Olivia suggested suddenly, her eyes brightening beneath her purple headband. We've never been ice skating before. Richard smiled. Woolman Rink in Central Park is beautiful this time of year. But we don't know how, Lily pointed out, practical as always. I could teach you, Richard offered. I used to skate when I was your age. He glanced at Victoria, who sat nearby pretending to read a book while supervising their interaction. With your aunt's permission, of course. Victoria looked up, surprised to be consulted. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded. As long as I can watch. An hour later, they stood at Woolman Rink, the girls bundled in matching scarves and mittens, despite their usual preference for distinct colors. Richard had arranged for a section of the rink to be less crowded, allowing the beginners space to learn without intimidation. The trick is to find your balance first, Richard explained as he helped each girl lace up her skates. Then take small steps until you feel comfortable gliding. Predictably, each approached the ice differently. Lily stepped forward determinedly, refusing assistance despite her wobbling ankles. Emma analyzed other skaters first, calculating the optimal angle for balance. Sophia admired the artistic lines left by blades on fresh ice. Olivia simply giggled with excitement, clutching Richard's hand tightly. Each fell within the first 5 minutes. That's normal, Richard assured them, helping Emma up after a particularly dramatic tumble. Everyone falls when they're learning. Even you? Sophia asked, already trying to stand again. Especially me, Richard laughed. My first time I fell so often my mother threatened to use me as a mop for the ice. The girls giggled at this image, their initial frustration fading. Richard moved between them, offering gentle corrections and steady hands when needed. By the second hour, all four could make wobbly circuits around the rink with minimal assistance. Watch me, Hannah called, letting go of Richard's hand to glide forward independently. She wobbled but maintained her balance, face alight with accomplishment. I'm doing it too, Emma joined in, attempting a small turn that nearly ended in disaster before Richard caught her elbow. Even Lily seemed to be enjoying herself, her usual serious expression softened into concentration as she perfected her technique. As the afternoon waned, the girls grew tired but refused to quit, determined to master this new skill. When Sophia took a hard fall, tears springing to her eyes despite her attempts to be brave, Richard knelt beside her on the ice. You know, he said gently, even professional skaters fall. The important part is getting back up. Sophia sniffled. Does it always hurt this much? Not always, Richard answered honestly. It gets easier and you get stronger. She studied his face, then nodded, allowing him to help her up. At the rink's edge, Victoria waited with hot chocolate. As the girls gratefully accepted warm drinks, their cheeks flushed from exertion and cold, Richard noticed Victoria watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Thank you, she said quietly when the girls were distracted. They needed this, something new, something joyful. Richard nodded, surprised by the momentary truce. They're remarkable children. Yes, Victoria agreed. Catherine did well with them. Catherine and you, Richard acknowledged. You've been there from the beginning. Something shifted in Victoria's eyes. Perhaps recognition that despite their adversarial positions, they shared a common devotion to 4 small lives. Can we come again next Saturday? Lily asked suddenly, breaking the moment. I want to practice my turns. Richard looked to Victoria, who hesitated, then nodded. Absolutely, Richard said, his heart fuller than it had been in years. Next Saturday it is. The exclusive jewelry store on Fifth Avenue was accustomed to Richard Hamilton's exacting standards, but even they were impressed by his current request. 4 identical lockets, but with subtle variations, he explained to the master jeweler. Similar enough to honor their connection as sisters, different enough to celebrate their individuality. The jeweler nodded, sketching preliminary designs. And the engravings you mentioned? Richard handed over a piece of paper with 4 variations of the same message, words he'd spent weeks perfecting, meaningful yet not overwhelming, something his daughters might treasure without feeling pressured by his growing place in their lives. I'd like them by next Saturday, he added. Mr. Hamilton, custom work of this caliber typically requires— Price is no object, Richard interrupted gently. This is important. The quadruplets' 8th birthday had become the focus of Richard's thoughts. Victoria had reluctantly extended an invitation after weeks of improved relations following their ice skating outings. They had settled into a tentative routine, Saturdays for activities, occasional weekday dinners and school events where Richard maintained a respectful distance while gradually becoming a familiar presence in the girls' lives. He'd learned more about their individual personalities. Lily's fierce protection of her sisters and her secret collection of adventure novels. Emma's brilliant mind and fascination with the cosmos. Sophia's artistic talent and emotional sensitivity. Olivia's musical abilities and her gift for bringing harmony to any situation. They weren't just the quadruplets to him anymore. They were 4 distinct, extraordinary little girls who happened to share the same face. When Saturday arrived, Richard felt uncharacteristically nervous as he approached Victoria's modest home. Children's voices and laughter spilled from inside, a small gathering with classmates nowhere near the elaborate celebrations Richard might have arranged. But he understood Victoria's limitations and respected her efforts to provide normalcy. Victoria greeted him with a nod, their relationship having evolved into a wary tolerance. They've been asking when you'd arrive, she admitted. The living room was decorated with blue and silver balloons, and a homemade cake shaped like a stack of books took center stage, cleverly combining Lily's love of reading, Emma's love of knowledge, and Sophia's artistic appreciation. Mr. Hamilton, Olivia spotted him first, rushing over in her purple party dress. The others quickly joined her, all wearing their signature colors. Happy birthday, Richard said, handing over his carefully wrapped gift. This is for all of you to share. The girls opened it together, removing the velvet box with curious expressions. Inside lay 4 sterling silver lockets, each with subtle variations, Lily's slightly more angular, Emma's featuring a tiny sapphire accent, Sophia's with softly scalloped edges, and Olivia's adorned with a delicate musical note pattern. They're beautiful, Sophia whispered, opening hers to find a tiny photograph of Catherine inside, smiling the way they remembered her before her illness. On the opposite side of each locket was an engraving. In Lily's, your mother's courage lives in you. In Emma's, your mother's wisdom lives in you. In Sophia's, your mother's creativity lives in you. In Olivia's, your mother's harmony lives in you. The room went quiet as each girl read her message. Victoria watched from nearby, her expression softening despite herself. It was Lily who moved first, closing her locket carefully and slipping the chain over her head. The others followed, adjusting the length so the lockets sat perfectly. How did you know? Emma asked, her voice unusually emotional. Know what? Richard asked gently. These are the things Mom used to tell us, Lily explained, her fingers touching the locket. She called me her brave one. And me her wise one, Emma added. And me her creative soul, Sophia continued. And me her harmony, Olivia finished softly. Richard felt his own eyes grow damp. I didn't know that, he admitted. But your mother once told me she saw those qualities in herself. I guess she recognized them in each of you. Victoria, watching from nearby, gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. perhaps the first genuine approval she'd shown. As the party continued, Richard noticed each girl touching her locket occasionally, a new gesture that seemed to comfort them. When it was time to leave, Olivia hugged him tightly, Emma offered a shy smile, Sophia thanked him earnestly, and Lily, still reserved but softer now, did something unprecedented. She extended her hand formally. "Thank you for remembering Mom with us," she said, with an 8-year-old's solemnity. Richard shook her small hand, matching her seriousness. "Thank you for sharing your birthday with me." As he left, he noticed all 4 girls watching from the window, their new lockets catching the afternoon light. 4 identical faces with 4 different expressions, connected to their mother and now, in some small way, to him. Winter settled over New York, transforming the city into a landscape of snow-dusted buildings and foggy windows. For Richard, the changing season brought new rhythms to his evolving relationship with the Quadruplets. Saturday ice skating had become a tradition, the girls improving each week with growing confidence. Thursday dinners now featured animated debates about books, science facts, and ballet techniques. Occasionally, when Victoria needed an evening to herself, Richard would step in, not babysitting, as Lily firmly pointed out, but hanging out. On one such evening in early December, Richard arrived at the brownstone with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. The girls greeted him with their distinctive styles, Olivia with an enthusiastic hug, Sophia with a detailed explanation of her latest painting, Emma with a fact about Jupiter's moons, and Lily with a careful assessment of his punctuality. "What's that?" Lily asked, pointing to the portfolio as Richard hung up his coat. "Something I wanted to show you after dinner," he replied casually. Victoria had left homemade lasagna, and the 5 of them fell into their routine. Richard setting the table while Emma calculated the precise timing for reheating, Sophia arranged napkins into elaborate shapes, and Lily supervised the entire operation with her clipboard checklist. As they ate, Richard noticed how much had changed in the month since he'd first met them. Conversations flowed naturally, inside jokes had developed, and his presence had become expected, even welcomed. The girls still maintained boundaries. Certain topics remained off limits, certain memories were private, but the walls had lowered, significantly. After dinner, as the girls cleared the table according to the chore chart hanging prominently on the refrigerator, Richard opened his portfolio on the coffee table. "I have a project I wanted your opinion on," he said as they gathered around. Inside were architectural drawings, blueprints for what appeared to be a large apartment. Emma immediately began studying the measurements with interest. "What is this?" she asked. "I'm thinking of moving," Richard explained. "My current place is too big for just one person and doesn't feel much like a home. These are plans for a new apartment I'm considering." Sophia peered at the drawings. "It has 4 bedrooms." "Yes," Richard confirmed carefully. "1 master bedroom, and 3 others. I was hoping you 4 might help me decide how those rooms should be designed." The Quadruplets exchanged glances, one of their silent conferences that Richard had come to recognize. "Why do you need 4 extra bedrooms?" Lily asked directly, ever the pragmatist. Richard took a deep breath. This was a delicate moment, not a full revelation, but a step toward it. "Well," he said gently, "I thought it might be nice if someday you 4 might want to stay over occasionally, if that's something you'd be comfortable with." Another silent exchange between the sisters, then Emma asked, practical as always. "Our aunt would have to approve." "Of course," Richard agreed quickly. "I've already spoken with Victoria. She thinks it might be a good idea eventually, but only if you want to." Sophia was already examining the blueprints with excitement. "Could we each have our own room with different colors?" "That's exactly what I was thinking." Richard smiled. "Each room designed specifically for each of you." Lily remained skeptical. "We've never stayed anywhere without Aunt Victoria, not since Mom." "I understand," Richard said gently. "This isn't something that has to happen right away. It's just planning for possibilities." Emma adjusted her glasses, studying the layout. "The corner room gets the most natural light. It would be optimal for my telescope." "I'm evaluating options," Emma corrected. It's hypothetical analysis. Sophia had already grabbed a pencil and was sketching ballet dancers along the margin of the blueprint. My room could have a bar along one wall for practice. Richard watched them carefully, gauging their reactions. This was delicate territory, suggesting a deeper integration into their lives, a more permanent connection. Unexpectedly, it was Lily who asked the question that had been hovering unspoken for months. Why are you doing all this? Why do you care about us so much? The room went quiet. Richard felt 4 identical pairs of eyes watching him, waiting. He chose his words carefully. Because you 4 are the most important people in my life now. Because knowing you, spending time with you has changed everything for me. But why? Lily pressed. We're just kids you met at a funeral. Richard glanced toward the kitchen where Victoria had appeared, listening. She gave him a small nod. Permission to navigate this moment, as he saw fit. The truth is, I cared about your mother very much, and I see so much of her in each of you. But beyond that, I've come to care about you 4 for exactly who you are. He paused, then added, some people come into our lives by birth, some by chance, and some by choice. I'm choosing to be in your lives, if you'll let me. Olivia moved, first coming to sit beside him on the couch. I'd like a purple room, she said simply. It's really big, Sophia whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the empty apartment. The 5 of them stood in the center of Richard's new home, a spacious Upper West Side apartment with large windows overlooking Central Park. 3 months of planning, designing, and construction had transformed the space exactly as they had envisioned together. Richard watched nervously as the quadruplets took in their surroundings, their identical faces expressing different reactions. Lily's careful assessment, Emma's analytical gaze, Sophia's artistic appreciation, and Olivia's uncontained excitement. Want to see your rooms? Richard asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the significance of this moment. The girls nodded, following him down a hallway where he opened 4 doors in succession, revealing 4 uniquely designed spaces. Lily's room featured floor-to-ceiling, bookshelves filled with adventure novels and classics, a window seat with cushions perfect for reading, and walls painted a warm yellow that caught the morning light. Emma's corner room, designed for optimal natural light, included a built-in desk for her scientific pursuits, a special platform by the window for her telescope, and walls painted sky blue with subtle constellations. Sophia's room showcased an artist's paradise, an easel positioned to capture the best light, open shelving for supplies, a small pottery wheel, and walls painted in a gentle green that complemented her paintings. Olivia's space was designed for music and movement, a ballet bar along one wall, acoustic panels to enhance sound quality, a keyboard by the window, and walls in her signature. Lavender. They're perfect, Olivia breathed, twirling into her room. Dimensionally optimal, Emma agreed, already testing her desk height. Sophia ran her fingers along the art supplies Richard had stocked. You remembered everything we talked about. Lily, always the most reserved, examined her bookshelves carefully. You got all the books I mentioned, she said quietly, touching the spines of her favorite adventure series. Every one, Richard confirmed, watching her reaction closely. Victoria stood in the hallway, her expression complex. Their relationship had evolved from antagonism to cautious cooperation over the past months. The legal battle had transformed into negotiation, with Victoria gradually accepting Richard's role in the girls' lives, though she still harbored reservations about his long-term intentions. There's one more room I'd like to show you, Richard said, leading them to a door at the end of the hall. Inside was a small study with 3 framed photographs on the wall, each showing Catherine with the girls at different ages. A display case held items Richard had carefully collected, programs from Catherine's art exhibitions, her favorite art books, and a small watercolor she'd painted in Paris. This is the memory room, he explained gently. A place where your mother will always be part of this home too. For once, all 4 girls were speechless. Victoria stepped forward, touching one of the photographs. She would have liked this, she admitted quietly. Richard had been careful to include Victoria in this process, designing a guest room that would be exclusively hers when she stayed with the girls. It was his acknowledgement of her importance in their lives, not a replacement but an extension of their family circle. "When can we stay?" Olivia asked excitedly. "That's up to your aunt," Richard replied, looking to Victoria. Victoria nodded slowly. "Perhaps next weekend. A trial run." As they explored the rest of the apartment, Richard observed the girls' reactions. They moved through the space with increasing comfort, claiming favorite spots in the living room, testing chairs at the dining table, examining the kitchen with curious eyes. This was more than an apartment. It was a statement of commitment, a physical manifestation of his promise to be part of their lives. Not replacing their home with Victoria, but providing another place where they belonged. Later, as they prepared to leave, Sophia hung back, looking up at Richard with Catherine's eyes. "Thank you for the art supplies," she said softly. "Mom always said I got my creativity from her, but she also said I got my attention to detail from," she hesitated, studying his face carefully, "from someone else who was very important to her." Before Richard could respond, she hurried to join her sisters in the elevator. Victoria, witnessing the exchange, gave Richard a meaningful look. "They're putting it together," she said quietly. "Sooner or later, they'll figure it out on their own." Richard nodded, understanding the implication. The time for complete honesty was approaching, not just for his sake, but for 4 little girls who deserved to know the truth about where they came from. The morning was clear and crisp as Richard stood behind the Quadruplets at Greenwood Cemetery. Almost exactly 1 year had passed since Catherine's funeral, the day he'd first glimpsed 4 identical little girls watching him from behind an oak tree. Now they stood together at Catherine's grave, the polished stone bearing her name catching the winter sunlight. Each girl held a single white rose positioned in a solemn line before the headstone. This pilgrimage had been their idea, a way to mark the anniversary of their mother's passing. Victoria stood slightly apart, giving them space for this intimate moment. "Mom loved white roses," Sophia explained, placing hers gently against the stone. "They symbolize purity and new beginnings," Emma added, setting hers beside Sophia's. "And remembrance," Lily finished softly, being the last to place her flower. Olivia had already set her rose down, her fingers lingering on the cold marble. "Do you think she can see us?" she asked, looking up at Richard. He knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I believe that people we love never truly leave us. They live on in our memories, in our hearts, and in the parts of ourselves that come from them." Victoria had helped him prepare for this day, sensing the girls were finally ready for deeper truths. The Quadruplets had been staying overnight at his apartment regularly for months now, their rooms becoming truly theirs, filled with personal treasures and growing collections. Richard's life had transformed completely. Business empires and boardrooms now balanced with ballet recitals, science projects, and bedtime stories. As they stood in quiet reflection, Richard noticed Emma studying the dates on the headstone with particular intensity. 8 years, she murmured, almost to herself. "That's how long Mom was alone with us." Richard felt Victoria's gaze on him, a warning and permission simultaneously. These brilliant children were connecting dots, calculating timelines, recognizing patterns. The questions were coming, ready or not. After a respectful silence, they walked together through the cemetery, returning to the cars parked at the entrance. Victoria drew Richard aside while the girls walked ahead. "They found something yesterday," she said quietly, "while packing for their next stay at your apartment." Richard's heart quickened. "What was it?" "Letters. In the back of Catherine's desk drawer. One she never sent to you, explaining about her pregnancy, about the girls." They read them. Victoria's expression was complex: regret, resignation, relief. "I've answered their questions as honestly as I could, but they need to hear the truth from you." Richard watched his daughters walking ahead, 4 identical profiles against the winter landscape. "Are they angry?" "Confused," Victoria corrected. "But also hopeful, I think." As they reached the cars, Lily suddenly turned, her expression serious as her eyes met Richard's. "We need to talk to you," she announced with the directness that was so characteristically hers. "Alone?" Victoria nodded. "I'll see you all at home later," she said, an acknowledgement that this conversation belonged to Richard and his daughters. In the warmth of Richard's car, 4 solemn faces turned toward him. No one spoke for several moments. The only sound, the gentle hum of the heater. "We know," Lily finally said simply. Richard's heart stopped. "Know what?" "That you're our father," Emma clarified. "Practical as always. We figured it out, the timeline matches, Mom's letters explained everything." "She never told you about us," Sophia added, her artistic sensitivity evident in her empathetic expression. "She thought she was protecting your dreams." "Did you really not know?" Olivia asked, her voice small. "All this time?" Richard took a deep breath, meeting their identical gazes, Catherine's eyes looking back at him, waiting for truth. "I didn't know," he confirmed gently. "Not until I saw you at the funeral. If I had known, nothing would have kept me from you." "Nothing?" "Aunt Victoria said Mom was trying to be noble," Emma observed. "Statistically improbable but emotionally consistent with her character." Despite the tension, Richard smiled at Emma's analytical perspective. "Your mother believed she was doing what was best for everyone. She made a choice I wish she hadn't, but I understand why she did." "So what happens now?" Lily asked, ever focused on practical next steps. "That's up to you," Richard answered honestly. "I've already fallen in love with who you are, your courage, your brilliance, your creativity, your kindness. I would be honored to be your father, but only if that's what you want." The car fell silent again, as 4 identical faces considered. His words, their expressions shifting as they processed this confirmation of what they'd already deduced. It was Olivia who broke the silence, reaching across to take Richard's hand. "I think," she said with the simple clarity that was her gift, "Mom would be happy you found us." Spring had returned to New York, the city awakening from winter's grip with tender green buds in Central Park and a gentler quality to the light. 1 year after Catherine's death, life had found a new rhythm, a delicate balance between honoring what was lost and embracing what remained. Standing in the spacious living room of his Upper West Side apartment, Richard watched as movers carried, in colorful suitcases and boxes. After months of legal negotiations, court-appointed evaluations, and careful transitions, today marked the official beginning of shared custody between Richard and Victoria. The Quadruplets would spend weekdays at Richard's apartment, close to their school, and weekends at Victoria's home in Brooklyn. "Where does this go?" asked a mover holding up a science kit. "Emma's room, the blue one with the star chart on the wall," Richard directed. Each girl was overseeing the placement of her treasured possessions differently. Lily had created a detailed inventory and checklist, methodically ensuring nothing was misplaced. Emma calculated the optimal furniture arrangement for maximum efficiency. Sophia directed the aesthetic placement of her art supplies with an artist's eye. Olivia simply twirled through rooms, testing the acoustics with impromptu songs. Victoria stood in the kitchen, arranging familiar snacks in the pantry, creating threads of continuity between 2 homes. Her relationship with Richard had evolved from antagonism to a cautious alliance cemented by their shared devotion to 4 little girls. "They seem happy," she observed as Richard joined her. "I hope so," he replied. "This transition can't be easy, even if they've been asking for it." "Catherine would be pleased," Victoria said after a moment, surprising him. "She wanted them to know you eventually. She just ran out of time." Richard nodded, grateful for Victoria's grudging acceptance. "Thank you for raising them so well, for being there when I couldn't be." Victoria's expression softened momentarily before she returned to arranging juice boxes with military precision. In the hallway, Richard paused outside Lily's room, where she was meticulously organizing her bookshelf according to a complex system only she understood. "Need any help?" he offered. "No, thank you," she responded, not looking up from her task. Lily had been the most reserved about the new arrangement, carefully maintaining emotional distance even as she participated in the practical aspects of the move. Richard respected her boundaries, understanding that trust came hardest to the protective firstborn. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need anything." As he turned to leave, Lily's voice stopped him. "The adventure books go on the second shelf." He recognized this for what it was, not a request for help, but an invitation to understand. Her system, her world. Second shelf, got it. In Emma's room, complex calculations covered a whiteboard as she determined the optimal angle for her telescope. "The light pollution variables are challenging, but I've calculated a 23% improvement over our previous location. I had the windows treated with special film to reduce ambient light," Richard mentioned. Emma looked up, surprised. "That's actually very helpful. Thank you." In Sophia's art studio, paint already dotted the smock she wore as she arranged her supplies. "The light here is different," she observed. "It changes how the colors look. Is that good or bad?" Richard asked. Sophia considered thoughtfully. "Just different. I'll need to adjust my technique." She smiled suddenly. Mom always said artists need to embrace change. Finally, in Olivia's music room, Richard found her sitting at the keyboard, playing a gentle melody that echoed through the apartment. "It's Mom's song," she explained when she noticed him listening. "The one she used to hum when she was happy." Richard recognized the tune. Catherine had often hummed it while working. "It's beautiful." Olivia patted the bench beside her. "I could teach you the notes." Later, as evening approached, Richard and Victoria prepared dinner together in a strange domestic partnership neither could have imagined a year earlier. The girls set the table, their movements synchronized yet distinct, each contributing in her unique way. As they gathered for their first official dinner in this new arrangement, an awkward silence fell. This was more than a meal. It was the beginning of a new chapter, acknowledgement of a truth long hidden. Lily, ever the leader, finally spoke. "We made something for you," she said to Richard, her voice carefully neutral as she nodded to her sisters. From under the table they produced a simply wrapped package. Inside was a frame containing 4 separate photographs, each girl in her signature color, smiling at the camera. Across the bottom in different handwriting were 4 signatures: Lily, Emma, Sophia, and Olivia, followed by a single word in each child's script: Dad. Richard stared at the gift, emotion overwhelming him. When he looked up, 4 identical faces watched him, Catherine's eyes reflected in each, but with expressions uniquely their own. "Is that okay?" Olivia asked softly. "If we call you Dad now?" "Nothing," Richard said, his voice breaking, "would make me prouder." As they began their meal together, Richard knew that this makeshift family, born of secrets, united by love, had finally found its truth. 4 daughters he never knew existed had become the center of his world. The legacy Catherine had left them both, the future neither had dared to imagine. And somewhere he believed Catherine was smiling.